Welcome to this video of solving quadratic equations using the quadratic formula. By the end of this video, you should be able to identify a, b, and c in the standard form quadratic equation, and you should be able to use the quadratic formula to determine the solutions of a quadratic equations. Okay, so we want to review the standard form of a quadratic equation. And you have to remember why this is so important is the a is always next to the x squared term. The b is always next to the single x. And the c is the constant. It has no variable. So that way when we're referring to a, b, and c, you're sure to, you know where to get the numbers from. So we have this equation, this formula here. It's called the quadratic formula. And in this formula, we dealt with b squared minus 4ac as the discriminant. Now the discriminant would tell us how many and what type of solutions do we have. Do we have one real, two real, or no real solutions? The entire formula will tell us what the actual solutions are. The one thing that's nice about the quadratic formula is it always works. Sometimes we can solve by factoring, but you can't factor every problem, but the quadratic formula could still be able to solve it and tell you where that graph crosses or touches the x-axis. So that's what's really nice about the quadratic formula. Now there's a couple things I want you to take note of here. Right here, this is a plus and a minus. The plus and minus means that both addition and subtraction. So that means the problem really gets worked twice, once with addition and once with subtraction. It's a math shortcut when we're putting them together in a formula. And another thing that's really important, and we had this when we were talking about factoring too, to use a quadratic formula, the equation must be in standard form. So you can't have things on both sides of the equal. You must have all like terms combined and everything. So everything has to be on the same side of the equals, and it should say equals 0. All right, so let's take a look at a couple of these. On number 1, identify a, b, and c. A is an understood 1. B is a positive 6. And c is a positive 8. Now, to plug this into the equation, it says negative b. So what that really means is whatever the opposite of b is. If b is a positive 6, when we plug it in, it's going to be negative 6. Then we're going to say plus or minus. We'll split these in a few minutes. The square root, and under here is where our discriminant number comes in. We'll have b squared minus 4 times a times c, and then this whole thing is going to be divided by 2 times a. So I just took and I plugged in to my equation, I plugged in the b value here and here, okay, and then I plugged in the a value right there and right there, so it gets plugged in twice, and then I plugged in my c value only in one spot, and it gets plugged in right there. So all we've done is taken the numbers from our equation and plugged them in. So let's start to simplify. So I'm going to keep the negative 6 plus or minus. I want to know what the number under the square root is, so I want to know what the discriminant is. So without the square root, I'm just going to get the number. So it's 6 squared minus 4 times a times c, and that gives me 4. So I'm going to put a 4 underneath my radical divided by 2. So now what we need to look at is, does this radical reduce? It does. What is the square root of 4? Well, the square root of 4 is 2, so it needs to be simplified. So what we're saying is negative 6 plus add or subtract 2, and then divide that number by 2. And what that really looks like, remember I said this is really two problems. So that says negative 6 plus 2 divided by 2, and negative 6 minus 2 divided by 2. two separate problems because remember the quadratic can go through the x-axis up to 2 times. So I have negative 6 plus 2 is negative 4 divided by 2. So this side crosses the x-axis at negative 2. Let's see where the other side. Negative 6 minus 2 is negative 8 divided by 2. The other side crosses at negative 4. Okay, so the quadratic formula tells us exactly where the graph is going to cross or touch the x-axis. Because these are nice, pretty whole numbers, that means we could have factored that problem. But they are not always nice, pretty numbers. A lot of times you're going to end up with radicals. So we got to be aware of what's about to happen. Okay, so this will work in every single quadratic equation. It will tell you exactly where the graph crosses or touches the x-axis. Let's try, it says 3, but it's just number 2. Remember our A value, there is 1. B is a positive 3, and C is a negative 2. So we're going to plug it in. So we have x equals, it says negative B. Well, B is a positive 3, so we just make it negative 3. Plus or minus, reminding us we got to do this twice, once with addition, once with subtraction. And let's plug in our discriminant, which is b squared minus 4 times a times c. And that whole side, the whole entire side is going to be divided by 2 times a, which is 1. Okay? Luckily, this formula is on your formula sheet, so you can keep referring back to it. So I'm going to start to simplify. I have negative 3 plus or minus, and I want to know what the discriminant number is. So when I put it in my calculator, give it a try, pause the video, put in just the number part, and see what you get. Okay, hopefully you put it in your calculator. I got a 17 there, and 2 times 1 is 2. Now, can we simplify the square root of 17? We can. 17 is a prime number, 17 times 1. This will not break down any further, so we are actually finished. You can write it just like this, and you might be thinking to yourself, but there should be 2 answers. There really are 2 answers here. One of them is negative 3 plus the square root of 17 divided by 2, and one of them is negative 3 minus the square root of 17 divided by 2. Those are 2 separate numbers. We don't exactly know the exact number. We could figure it out. We could put this in our calculator and get a decimal approximation. But usually what we're looking for is the simplified radical form right here. And it's simplified because everything's the same except one's plus and one's minus. We can write them together. All right. Hopefully we're doing okay. Let's keep plugging in and see what happens. Let's look at the real number 3. So when I look at here, I notice right away that there are only 2 terms here instead of 3. So let's be real careful and make sure we're plugging in what we've got. A is always next to the squared term, so that's A. B is always next to the single variable, and I do not see just a single x, so I'm going to say B equals 0, because it's not there. And our constant is 5, so that is our C value. So now we're going to go plug them in. Pause the video and see if you can plug everything in, and then come back to see how you did. All right, let's see how you did setting this up. So you put negative b here, so it's 0, so I didn't really put a negative in front of it. It just is 0 because there was no b value in this one. So when we go to start simplifying, we're going to get 0 plus or minus the square root of 60, all divided by 6. So we can simplify the square root of 60. So let's make a little room here, and let's just remind ourselves how to simplify radicals. So that'd be 6 times 10. The 6 is going to break down to a 2 times 3, and the 10 will break down to 2 times 5. Cross those out because we already used them. And if I look, I have a pair of 2's. So that means we're going to get a 2 on the outside, And you have a 3 and a 5 with no pair, so you re-multiply them to go back underneath. All over 6. Well, 0 plus or minus doesn't really matter, so we're going to say plus or minus 2 square root 15 over 6, and the 2 and the 6 will reduce. So we have plus or minus the square root of 15 divided by 3, because they'll reduce down there. So these are two separate numbers, okay? And so just like we did up here, these would be two separate numbers, but we can leave it in this shortened form. All right, let's try number 4. So we have negative b. So b is -1, so I'm going to put a positive 1 there. Plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, all divided by 2 times a. Okay, so make sure you're getting your information. If you need to, keep labeling A, B, and C so it helps with your thinking. But we've been labeling A, B, and C for a couple days, so hopefully we're starting to pick it up. 8, B, C. Okay, now stop the video and try to simplify down to this very first step. So you've got your number. What's this going to be in your denominator, and what is the discriminant going to be, and leave it under the radical, and let's see how you do. Stop the video and come back to check to see how you did. So I have 1 plus or minus the square root of 109 divided by -6. So we need to check, can we break down 109? So I'm going to do that over here where I've got a little bit more space. So I've got 109. And I went through, remember you can use your calculator in order to check. So you would go into your y equals and say 109 divided by x, and we can see what the factors are. That might help us figure something out. Go look at our table. And we only want to look at the whole numbers. So I have 1 times 109, and I kept going, and I'm not going to make you wait the whole time. I did the whole thing. 109 is a prime number. There are no factor pairs that are going to multiply down here for us. So we can't break this down any further. So that would be our answer. But normally what you're probably going to see is this negative sign won't be left in the bottom. They'll move the negative sign up top like that. -1 plus or minus the square root of 109 divided by a +6. That's probably how you're going to see it. So those, remember, those are two different spaces. Just like we did here, you can split them apart and see they're actually two different numbers. All right, let's take a look at number 6. Now, number 6, that's our caution note to use a quadratic formula. The equation must be in standard form. It has to be equal to 0. And this is not equal to 0. Everything needs to be on the same side of the equals. It doesn't matter which way you move it. If you think, you guys tend to do better when the equals a number is on the right, so I tend to move the right-hand side stuff over. So that's a positive 8x, so I'm going to subtract it. That's a -3, so I'm going to add it. They cancel out on the right, leaving 0. On this side, there are no like terms. We have an x squared, we have an x, and a constant. So I have 6x squared minus 8x plus 3. So everything got moved over to the other side. They're on the same side of the equals. Now we have our a, our b, and our c, and we're just going to plug them in. So remember, our formula is -b. So it's -8, so I'll put 8 plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, and the whole thing is going to be divided by 2a. Okay, so let's simplify this down. Pause the video and try to simplify it just like we did up here and see what you get. All right, so now here we are. I got a -8 as my discriminant. Now remember, can we take the square root of a negative number? If you're not sure, we'll take the square root of -8, non-real answers. Remember, we said if our discriminant was negative, we had non-real answers. So we just stop right there and we say no real solutions. Okay, that's all we can do with that one. In Algebra 2, you'll find out how to deal with the negative, and it will have two solutions, but they're going to be two imaginary solutions. All right, and our last one here, I want you to pause the video. I want you to rearrange this equation and get everything on the same side of the equals, and then come back to see how you did. Okay, so we were using our properties of equality, and we should have been able to rearrange the equation. We've been doing that all year. And I got 4x squared plus 4x minus 1 equals 0. So we have our A and our B and our C, and let's go ahead and plug them in. Our formula says negative B, so that's a positive 4, so negative B would be negative 4, plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4 times A times C, and the whole thing gets divided by 2 times A. Okay, stop the video, and I want you to go all the way through the rest of the problem to see what happens, see how you do, and come back to me. All right, so when I started to simplify down, in my in-between step, I had -4 plus or minus the square root of 32 divided by 8. I knew the 32 would break down, so I broke it down, and I ended up getting 4 square root 2. So I had -4 plus or minus 4 square root 2 divided by 4. Now, the one thing you really have to check is you want to check these three numbers right here. If they can be divided by the same number, well, then we should go ahead and simplify. If they can't all be divided, then we're just going to leave it as it is. But these are all divisible by 4. So if I divide -4 by 4, I get a -1. Then I have plus or minus. The 4 there is going to be a 1, which you don't have to write. You did have to write this one. Square root 2, because that's under the radical. We're not dealing with that right there. All over 1. So really, we don't need the over 1. This becomes your simplified answer right there. Okay, hopefully this was helpful. Let me know if you have any questions, and I'll see you in class.